Okay, we are live again at last with more of The Unknown Reality, Volume 2, a Seth book by Jane Bertz. We were disconnected again. We had our nightly disconnection, but now that is over with, and so we can resume. But now, because we were disconnected, I have to restart this, or I had to restart this. I need another minute or two to set things up. So 1 moment, please. Okay, that's good. The audio is good. My phone, I don't know if it really needs charge at this point, so I guess we won't worry about that right now. Don't worry about that now. And we'd better tweet this out again. So we literally got so close to the end of the 709th session that I decided to not even include that in the title for this. We will simply wrap up the 709th session in this very quickly and then proceed to session 710. And after being mysteriously dead. Let's see, what should I say? I'll begin with the unknown reality after being mysteriously disconnected. But I won't let that stop me. No, we are going to get through tonight's material one way or another. Okay, here we go. Still got my green tea. All right, dear viewers, sit back, relax, and enjoy the steady stream of Seth knowledge. All right, here we go. And I know where we left off as well, so I'm just gonna back up by a few sentences to get us sort of brought back up to speed with where we were, and then we'll finish out the session from there. Also, hello Ryan, welcome. I was live earlier, but then the connection died, as it is so fond of doing lately. But I'm back now. I'm back with a vengeance. Your own main consciousness has the ability to travel faster than light, as noted at 937. But those perceptions are too fast, and the neurologically structured patterns that you accept cannot capture them. For that matter, underlined cellular comprehension and reaction are too fast for you to follow. The poised framework of physical existence requires a pattern or a particular platform of experience that you accept as valid and real. At that level only is the universe that you know experienced. That platform or focus is the result of the finest cooperation. Your own free consciousness and your body consciousness form an alliance that makes this possible. With many pauses, give us a moment. Such a performance actually means that physical reality clicks off and on. Footnote. In Volume 1, see Session 681 and 684. End of footnote. You can relax and enjoy my stream. Awesome. I'm happy to hear that. That is what I encourage people to do. In your terms, it exists only in your waking hours. The inner work that makes it possible is largely done in the sleep state. The meeting of body consciousness and your main consciousness requires an intense focus, in which the greatest manipulations are necessary. Perceptions must be precise in physical terms. To some extent, however, that exquisite concentration means that certain limitations occur. Cellular comprehension is not tuned into by the normally conscious self, which is equally unaware of its own free-willing nature at quote-unquote higher levels. So a disengagement process must happen that allows each to regenerate. The consciousness then leaves the body. The body consciousness stays with it. Give us a moment. We are about to end the session after a few remarks. Pause at 12:07. Seth's comments were for Jane and took up another page of notes. End at 12:19 a.m. After the session, we had something more to eat, then relaxed by playing with our cat, Willie. When we did get to bed, Jane fell asleep at once. As I lay beside her in a most pleasant daze, I heard quite clearly in the cool night air the honking of geese as they flew south. Drowsily, I remembered the flight I'd listened to in the rain the day before yesterday. And that does indeed conclude that session 709. All right, next up is session 710. So let us see what that has in store. Let's see, give me a moment. Okay. Session 710, October 7th, 1974, 9:31 p.m., Monday. We have two compositions, both of them by Jane, to add to this session. She produced the first very short one, given below, yesterday. Seth briefly mentions it in the excerpted material at the end of tonight's session, with a promise to say more later. Those excerpts, in turn, came from his remarks about Jane's second composition, which she wrote late this afternoon after we'd finished reading certain material. Since this second piece is much longer, it's presented as Appendix 15. I suggest that it be read now, or at least before reaching the end of this session. Well, if Rob suggests that we read it now, then we read it now. There's a convenient link provided to it right here in the Kindle app. How delightful. All right, here we go. Appendix 15 for session 710. Today we read a long treatise on the quote-unquote truths advocated by quote-unquote holy men associated with various Eastern religious philosophies, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and so forth. Jane's quick and impassioned response through her own writing, as presented below, reflects feelings deeply rooted within her mystical nature, and also illuminates important aspects of the body and direction of the Seth material as a whole. Given those points, she's bound to have differences of belief with other views of reality. Yet I think more is involved than choosing among the belief systems offered by Eastern or Western cultures, for instance. That is, in more basic terms, each personality would make that kind of choice before physical birth, with the full understanding of the vast influence such a decision would have upon a life's work. Obviously, in those terms of linear time, Jane and I each feel that we chose our present environments. Being individualists, then, as I wrote in the introductory notes for Volume 1, we don't concentrate upon whatever parallels exist between Seth's concepts on the one hand and those of Eastern religious, philosophical, and mystical doctrines on the other. While we know of such similarities, we're just as aware of how different from them Seth's viewpoint can be, too. I added that even though we have no interest in putting down other approaches to inner reality, still we're firm believers in the, quote, inviolate nature of the individual consciousness before, during, and after physical existence in ordinary terms, end quote. Footnote. In Volume 1 of Unknown Reality, see the material on Jane, mysticism, and religion in the introductory notes, the 679th session, and Appendix 1 for that session. In that first appendix, the notes on Jane as an independent mystic, in quotes, despite her denial that she even thinks of herself as a mystic, are especially appropriate here. End of footnote. So, here, we leave it up to the reader to make the intuitive and overt connections between Seth's philosophy and the material Jane wrote today. The interested reader will also be able to compare her composition with certain passages in her long poem, Dialogues of the Soul and Mortal Self in Time, when that work is published in book form in September 1975. Thus, Jane demanded in her composition of this afternoon, October 7th, 1974, quote, "What is this passion for non-being, this denial of sensual life that drives so many gurus and self-proclaimed prophets? They speak out against desire while propelled by the overwhelming desire to lose themselves. They luxuriate in a kind of cosmic masturbation, titillating their psychic organisms into pitches of mindless excitement, cavorting in orgasms of self-surrender. They bask in a sort of universal steam bath that drives all impurities of individuality or creativity from their souls, leaving them immersed, supposedly forever, in a bliss beyond description, in which, indeed, their own experience disappears. Thank God that some God managed to disentangle itself from such psychic oneness, if that's what it's supposed to be. Thank God that some God loved itself enough to diversify, to create itself in a million different forms, to multiply, to explode its being inward and outward. Thank God that some God loved its own individuality enough to endow the least and the most, the greatest and the smallest, with its own unique being. The gurus say, give it all up. One of those we read about today counsels, quote, when you want to do one thing, do another instead. Do not do what you want to do, but what you should do, end quote. Never trust the self that you are, the gurus say, but the self that you should be. And that self is supposed to be dead to desire, beyond wanting or caring. Yet paradoxically, this non-feeling leads to bliss. The gurus say that all that is within you, yet tell you not to trust yourself. If all that is didn't want appearances, we wouldn't experience any. Yet appearances, the gurus say, are untruths, changing and therefore false. Wow. This is particularly interesting to me. This little essay or whatever from Jane. This is fascinating. Because it is true. I think probably most of the people who watch a stream like this will already know, yes, there's all these like Eastern philosophies that do advocate this sort of like surrender into this nebulous oneness, where you like completely lose your individuality or sense of self, and then that apparently results in a sort of bliss. And there's a number of things that can be said about that. I don't know. I have some different theories about it. One theory I have is that, let's see, how do I put this? That as a means of trying to cope with realities that an individual or groups of individuals declared were both terrible and unchangeable, they find ways of just dissolving, or at least seeming to dissolve, their individuality and sense of self altogether, so that they no longer have to deal with those terrible realities. And yes, the relief of that would feel like great bliss, wouldn't it? You know, it really would. It really would. There's something else I was going to say with that, or about that. Oh, also, people believing that they're unable to get their needs met, essentially, and even going so far as to try to say that, like, you shouldn't even try to get your needs met, or you should try to transcend your needs somehow, transcend your biology, transcend your ego, and immerse yourself in this sort of nirvana bliss. And I have mixed feelings about this because on some level, that starts to sound like presence. That starts to sound like what Eckhart Tolle calls presence. And I like doing that, by the way. I like being present. But I don't like taking it so far that I no longer have individuality, I no longer have a sense of self, and I'm just like blissed out in some nebulous nirvana, I guess. So I don't know. All I can say about it basically is that I have mixed feelings about it. But here we'll continue in just a moment. But that's one of the reasons I'm finding this so interesting, is because I have mixed feelings about it. It's like, ooh, what are their perspectives on it? What's Seth's perspective? What's Jane's perspective? Rob's perspective? Anyway. Footnote. From any of Seth's books, let alone Jane's, I could cite a number of comments that question much of the thinking behind different Eastern systems of religious thought. Seth, for example, in the 642nd session in Chapter 11 of Personal Reality, quote, "You will, underlined, not attain spirituality or even a happy life by denying the wisdom and experience of the flesh. You can learn more from watching the animals than you can from a guru or a minister, or from reading my book. But first you must divest yourself of the idea that your creaturehood is suspect. Your humanness did not emerge by refusing your animal heritage, but upon an extension of it." End quote. End of footnote. And yeah, it's like, I've felt that before, where to some extent, just being present with things feels right. But at the end of the day, when I honor the reality and the integrity of myself in creaturehood, as Seth would put it, or myself as a human, that just ends up feeling somehow much more right than anything else. Like, I don't know if being present and sort of, surrendering your individuality into this nebulous nirvana or whatever is the exact same thing. But if it is, I guess I would still even then say, well, I like maybe some of that, but not to the point where I'm actually like completely surrendering my sense of self and individuality. But I guess everyone has their own path, don't they? Maybe what's right for me is not right for someone else, and vice versa. Is my body an appearance, hence an untruth amid the truth which is changeless? Ah, dear body, then, how lovely and blessed your untruth, which is sensate and feels desire through the hollowest of bones. How blessed, bodies, leaping alive from the microscopic molecules that combine to walk down the autumn streets, assemble to form the sweet senses discrimination that perceives, for a time, the precise joy and unity of even one passing afternoon. The body's untruth, then, is holier than all truths, and if the body is an untruth, then I hereby proclaim untruth, and truth, and all the Guru's truths as lies. God knows itself through the flesh. God may know itself through 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 other worlds, as so may I. But because this world is, and because I am alive in it, it is more than appearance, more than a shackle to be thrown aside. It is a privilege to be here, to look out with this unique focus, with these individual eyes, not to be blinded by cosmic vision, but to see this corner of reality which I form through the miraculous connections of soul and flesh. Cherish the gifts of the gods. Don't be so anxious to throw your individuality back into their faces, saying, "I'm sick to death of myself and of my individuality. It burdens me." Even one squirrel's consciousness, suddenly thrown into the body of another of its kind, would feel a sense of loss, encounter a strangeness, and know in the sacredness of its being that something was wrong. Wear your individuality proudly. It is the badge of your godhood. You are a god living a life, being, desiring, creating. Through honoring yourself, you honor whatever it is God is, and become a conscious co-creator. End quote. End of Appendix 15. Wow. The only other thing I'll say with that is I also suspect, however, that it may simply be the path of least resistance for many people to sort of bliss out, like imagine someone who doesn't have the privilege of so easily embracing their humanness and of their individuality. Someone who is in great, great, great suffering. Well, a belief system or state of being or whatever that somehow transcends all of that probably is going to be what's best for them in that situation. But for those of us who are not in that kind of, hellish prison, it actually becomes far better, I would theorize at least, to embrace our individuality, embrace our humanity, and stop trying to transcend that which we are, and that which perhaps we are, I would even go so far as to say, supposed to be. So anyway, wait, are there more notes here that I did not get to? Let's see. Huh, yeah, there is. Or there are. Hang on. There's more notes for the appendix. Hang on. One moment. Okay, I guess there's an extension of note 2. I don't know why it didn't appear before, but picking up where we left off for note 2. For ourselves, and even considering Seth's concept of camouflage in Volume 1, see Note 3 for Appendix 11, Jane and I certainly believe that our physical existences and mental experiences are quite, quote-unquote, real in themselves. We could easily take a book to present the reasons for our particular beliefs, examining them in connection with both Eastern and Western religious philosophies. A good general question, we think, and one we'd like to see discussed with our own ideas of the inviolate nature of the individual in mind, has to do with the prevalence of ordinary, daily, conscious mind thinking and perception throughout much of the world. In historical terms, the situation has always existed for the human species, and we think it applies almost equally in Eastern lands, especially among the political leaders and ruling classes within them. You like what I'm talking about, Quested Gamer? Thank you. I agree. It's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting trying to figure this stuff out. I'm looking at the sort of opposing philosophies. Yet Buddhist belief, for instance, maintains that our perception of the world is not fundamental, but an illusion. Our quote-unquote ignorance of this basic undifferentiated quote-unquote suchness then results in the division of reality into objects and ideas. But why call our generalized awareness an illusion instead of regarding it as one of the innumerable manifestations that reality takes? No one is free of certain minimum physical needs or of self-oriented thought, I remarked to Jane recently, and each nation strives to expand its technological base no matter what its philosophy may be. Would a widespread use of Eastern religious doctrines be more practical on our Earth today, or the kind of self-knowledge Seth advocates? Even given their undeniable accomplishments, why didn't the Eastern countries create ages ago the immortal societies that could have served as models for those of the West to emulate? Cultures and/or nations in which all of the mundane human vicissitudes, in those terms, had been long understood and abolished: war, crime, poverty, ignorance, and disease. Certainly the species must be putting its conscious activities to long-term use, however, even with the endless conflicts and questions that grow out of such behavior. During the many centuries of our remembered history, those conflicts in themselves have been, and are, surely serving at least one of the consciousness's overall purposes, within our limits of understanding, to know itself more fully in those particular differentiated ways. So there you go. I guess another thing I would say on that, though, is I'm a fairly firm believer in diversifying what you study, at least to some extent, if not to a great extent. For example, as much as I love the Seth material, that is not all I study. I do study Eckhart Tolle's material, particularly The Power of Now, his famous book. I do study astrology and tarot and, the Western magical tradition, essentially. And, other various teachers out there and whatnot that may take some time to name if I were to go over them all. And I think that's probably ultimately what's best, because if you just study like one or two things, then it's going to seem far more likely like those are the most likely to be accurate perspectives, when that may not be the case. And even if there is no one accurate perspective, which there probably isn't in a multidimensional universe, still, to find the perspective that's right for you, it's probably going to take some digging, and it's probably going to take some digging in different areas. But again, remember, I believe anyway, if you want to take my advice and suggestions, that you can always tell what is right for you to study by what interests you, by the feeling of like energy and interest, the feeling of interest moving within you. Like, I know that sounds almost too simple, but well, there it is. It is that simple, I believe. Like, if something interests you, it interests you for a reason. So anyway, that was Appendix 15 that Rob advised that we read before continuing with session 710. So we can continue with that now. I've been studying food, and I study the mind and others. Cool. Yeah, that's quite diverse right there. The studying food compared with the mind and other things. Yeah, that's good. I would say that's good. Always good to diversify your studies. All right, so now resuming session 710. From Jane's Dream Journal, then, for Sunday, October 6, 1974, quote, I heard Seth's voice, very loud and powerful, as I lay asleep in bed last night, Saturday. This was the first time I've had such an experience. The voice was coming from the area of the room next door or just beyond, but also from above, like out of the sky or something. It wasn't speaking through anyone. That is, it wasn't coming from inside my head or through me, as it always has so far, even in the dream state. I tried to understand what was said. The words didn't seem to be directed at me particularly, but just to be there. It seemed that Seth was really laying it on somebody. At first I thought he was angry, but then I realized I was interpreting the power of the voice that way. This wasn't part of a dream, but I awakened almost at once as I tried to make out the words. Subjectively, I wasn't aware of Seth's presence in any way. The sound was like a super voice, maybe like nature speaking or something, not the way a person would speak. End quote. Now, good evening. Good evening, Seth. Dictation, quietly. To explore the unknown reality, you must venture within your own psyche, travel inward through invisible roads as you journey outward on physical ones. Your material reality is formed through joint cooperation, period. Your own ideas, objectified, become a part of the physical environment. In this vast cooperative venture, the thoughts and feelings of each living being take root, so to speak, springing up as objectified data. I said, in the 708th session, that each system of reality uses its own codified system. This effectively provides a sort of framework. Generally speaking, then, you agree to objectify certain inner data privately and en masse at any given quote-unquote time. In those terms, the airplane objectified the inner idea of flying in quote-unquote your time, and not in AD 1500, for example. You may have heard people say of an idea, quote, its time has not yet come, end quote. This simply means that there is not enough energy connected with the idea to propel it outward into the world of physical experience as an objective mass experienced event. I think what Seth may be talking about here is basically the idea of momentum. Like, an idea, in order for it to manifest into reality, at least theoretically, has to gain enough momentum by being focused upon long enough, either by one individual or by a group of people, a number of people. In the dream state and in certain other levels of reality, ideas and their symbols are immediately experienced. There is no time lag, then, between a feeling and its quote-unquote exteriorized condition. It is automatically experienced in whatever form is familiar and natural to the one who holds it. The psyche is presented with its own concepts. which are instantly reflected in dream situations and other events that will be explained shortly. If you dream of or yearn for a new house in physical life, for instance, it may take some time before that ideal is realized. Even though such a strong intent underlined will most certainly bring about its physical fulfillment. The same desire in the dreaming state, however, may lead to the instant creation of such a house as far as your dream experience is concerned. Again, there is no time lag between desire and its materialization. Damn, it's so hard to get comfortable tonight still. I was good for a while, but then not anymore. Pause, one of many, at 949. There are levels within dreams, highly pertinent but mainly personal, in that they reflect your own private intents and purposes. There are other levels, further away in your terms, that involve mass behavior on a psychic level, where together the inhabitants of the physical world plan out future events. Here, probabilities are recognized and utilized. Symbolism is used. There is such an interweaving of intent that this is difficult to explain. Private desires here are magnified as they are felt by others, or minimized accordingly, so that in the overall, large general plans are made having to do with the species at any given quote-unquote time. Here again, these desires and intents must fit into the codified system as it exists. Pause in a quiet but intent delivery. At these levels, you are still close to home. Beyond, there are layers of actuality in which your psyche is also highly involved, and these may or may not appear to have anything to do with the world that you know. When you travel into such realms, you usually do so from the dream state, still carrying your private symbols with you. Even here, these are automatically translated into experience. This is not your own codified system, however. You may journey underlined through such a reality, perceiving it opacally, layering it over with your own perceived symbols, and taking those for the quote-unquote real environment. In these terms, the real environment will be that which was generally perceived by the natural inhabitants of the system. To begin with, your own symbols rise from deep levels of the psyche, and in certain terms, you underlined are a part of any reality that you experience, but you may have difficulty in the interpretation of events. If you're in a world not yours, with your consciousness drifting, you are in free gear, so to speak, your feelings and thoughts flowing into experience. You have to learn how to distinguish your psychological state from the reality in which you find yourself if you want to maintain your alertness and explore that environment. Many of my readers find themselves in just such situations while they are sleeping. While still dreaming, they seem to come suddenly awake in an environment that appears to make no sense. Demons may be chasing them. The world may seem topsy-turvy. The dead and the living may meet and speak. 1016. Now, in almost all instances, demons in dreams represent the dreamer's belief in evil, underlined, instantly materialized. They are not the inhabitants of some netherworld, then, or underground. We will be giving some instructions that will enable readers to experiment with a projection of consciousness at least to some extent. It is very important for you to realize that even in dreams you form your own reality. Your state of mind, freed from its usual physical focus, creatively expresses itself in all of its power and brilliance. The state of mind itself serves as an intent, propelling you into realities of like conditions. Pause. In your world, you travel from one country to another, and you do not expect them to be all alike. Instead, you visit various parts of the world precisely because of the differences among them, so all out-of-body journeys do not lead to the same locale. Instinctively, you leave your body for varying amounts of time each night while you sleep, but those journeys are not quote-unquote programmed. You plan your own tours, in other words. As many people with the same interests may decide to visit the same country together, on tour, so in the out-of-body condition you may travel alone or with companions. If you are alert, you may even take snapshots, only as far as inner tours are concerned. The snapshots consist of clear pictures of the environment taken at the time, developed in the unconscious, and then presented to the waking mind. Can you hear them out there? There are techniques for using cameras, and a camera left at home will do you little good abroad. Footnote. A note added 6 weeks later, Seth further quote-unquote develops his camera analogy as dream photography, for instance, in section 5. See session 719 through 20. End of footnote. So it is the conscious alert mind that must take these pictures if you hope to later make sense of your inner journeys. That conscious reasoning mind must, underlined, therefore, be taken along. There are many ways of doing this, methods not really difficult to follow. Certain techniques will help you pack your conscious mind for your journey as you would pack your camera. It will be there when you need it, to take the pictures that will be your conscious memories of your journey. Do you want to rest your hand? 10:22. No, I said, although I'd been writing pretty steadily for the better part of an hour. Jane, in trance, held up a fresh bottle of beer. I opened it for her. Then, you must remember that the objective world, underlined, also is a projection from the psyche. Footnote. Is there really an objective world? Quote unquote, something out there for each of us to perceive? See my passage on naive realism in Appendix 12, along with Seth's own material on the question in Note 13 for that appendix. End of footnote. Naive realism, huh? That's going to be some interesting stuff when we get to that at the end of this book. I'll be very fascinated with that. Because you focus in it primarily, you understand its rules well enough to get along. A trip in the physical world merely represents the decision to walk or to choose a particular kind of vehicle. A car will not carry you across the ocean, so you take a ship or a plane. You are not astonished to see that the land suddenly gives way to water. You find that natural alteration quite normal. Underlined, you expect time to stay in its place, however. The land may change to water, for example, but today must not change into yesterday in the same fashion, or into tomorrow in the beginning of today's afternoon. Walking down the avenue, you expect the trees to stay in their places and not transform themselves into buildings. All of these assumptions are taken for granted in your physical journeys. You may find different customs and languages, yet even these will be accepted in the vast, overall, and basic assumptions within whose boundaries physical life occurs. You are most certainly traveling through the private and mass psyche when you so much as walk down the street. The physical world seems objective and outside of yourself, however. The idea of such outsideness is one of the assumptions upon which you build that existence. Interior traveling is no more underlined subjective than a journey from New York to San Francisco. You are used to projecting all destinations outside of yourself, period. The idea of varied inward destinations, involving motion through time and space, therefore appears strange. Now take your break. 10:36. Jane's delivery had remained quite quiet and steady. Boy, he was going strong, she said. He kept me under a good long time because of the noise in the apartment upstairs, and because of those phone calls too, I'll bet. Here she referred to a number of out-of-state calls she'd taken after supper this evening. She'd found 2 of them in particular to be rather upsetting. Resume in the same manner at 10:58. Yeah, think about that, since, at least theoretically, there is no out there world. It's all taking place within, in our own minds or our own consciousness. Then whenever you, like, indeed, as Seth says, so much as walk down the street, you're really just walking down the street of your own consciousness. And that's a mind-blowing consideration. Let's take a walk in the mind. Resume in the same manner at 10:58. Generally speaking, you have explored the physical planet enough so that you have a good idea of what to expect as you travel from country to country. Before a trip, you can produce travel folders that outline the attractions and characteristics of a certain locale. You are not traveling blind, therefore, and while any given journey may be new to you, you are not really a pioneer. The land has been mapped, and there are few basic surprises. The inner lands have not been as well explored. To say the least, they lie in virgin territory as far as your conscious mind is concerned. Others have journeyed to some of these interior locales, but since they were indeed explorers, they had to learn as they went along. Some, returning, provided guidebooks or travel folders telling us what could be expected. You make your own reality. If you were from a foreign land and asked one person to give you a description of New York City, you might take his or her description for reality. The person might say, New York City is a frightful place in which crime is rampant, gangs roam the streets, murders and rapes are the norm, and people are not only impolite but ready to attack you at a moment's notice. There are no trees, the air is polluted, and you can expect only violence. If you ask someone else, this individual might say instead, New York City has the finest of museums, open-air concerts in some of the parks, fine sculpture, theater, and probably the greatest collection of books outside of the Vatican. It has a good overall climate, a great mixture of cultures. In it, millions of people go their way daily in freedom. End quote. Period. Both people would be speaking about the same locale. Their descriptions would vary because of their private beliefs, and would be colored by the individual focus from which each of them viewed that city. One little anecdote I'm going to insert here, just because it's kind of fascinating, is that sort of to emphasize what Seth is saying, funny enough, on my way home from therapy today, I was walking back and I heard sirens and saw, I think, multiple police vehicles. And a little bit after that, I saw from afar, basically, I think someone getting arrested. Like, I saw a police car parked outside of like a bar or something, again, from a number of blocks away. So I was totally safe. And I think I saw someone getting arrested, or at least some police standing out there or whatever. And I thought, isn't that funny that I would be a match to that? I mean, it was right there. But then immediately after that, I thought, oh, and what was I just talking to my therapist about today? What was one of the main topics I was talking with him about? It was the idea of justice, of, right and wrong behavior, and, the ideal forms of justice, and what I personally believe those ideal forms should be. So we were talking about justice, and then I see police officers like arresting someone, literally right after that session. I think that's so fascinating. And it's true. I was like, yep, there it is. I activated that sort of, framework of perception in my vibration, and boom, manifestation. So I occasionally have interesting little encounters like that on my way to and from therapy, though. It's fascinating in and of itself. I almost like not having a working car sometimes, sort of, or I like that aspect of it anyway. Anyway, resuming. One person might be able to give you the city's precise... Let me make sure we're not missing anything here. Okay. One person might be able to give you the city's precise location in terms of latitude and longitude. The other might have no such knowledge and say instead, I take a plane at such and such a place at such and such a time, giving New York City as my destination, and if I take the proper plane, I always arrive there. Pause at 11:13. Explorers traveling into underlined inner reality, however, do not have the same kind of landmarks to begin with. Many have been so excited with their discoveries that they wrote guidebooks long before they even began to explore the inner landscape. They did not understand that they found what they underlined wanted to find, or that the seemingly objective phenomena originated in the reflections of the psyche. You may, for example, have read books numbering the quote-unquote inner realms and telling you what you can expect to encounter in each. Many of these speak of lords or gods of the realm, or of demons. In a strange way, these books do provide a service, for at certain levels you will find your own ideas materialized. And if you underlined believe in demons, then in those terms you will encounter them. The authors, however, suppose that the devils have a reality underlined outside of your belief in them, and such is not the case. The demons simply represent a state of your own mind that is seemingly out there, objectified. Therefore, whatever methods the authors use to triumph over these demons is often given as proof not only of the demon's reality, but of each method's effectiveness. Now, if you read such books, you may often program your activity along those lines, in the same way that a visitor to New York City might program experience of the city in terms of what he or she had been told existed there. That kind of structuring also does a disservice, however, for it prevents you from coming in contact with your own original concepts. There is no reason, for example, to encounter any demons or devils in any trance or out-of-body condition. Footnote. In chapter 14 of the Seth material, Jane and Seth gave a humorous, serious account of her out-of-body encounter with a demon, or quote-unquote black thing of her own creation. End of footnote. Pause. In such cases, your own hallucinations blind you to the environment within which they are projected. When your consciousness is not directly focused in physical reality, then the great creativity of the psyche is given fuller play. All of its dimensions are faithfully and instantly produced as experience when you learn to take your quote-unquote normally alert conscious mind underlined with you. And when you are free of such limiting ideas, then at those levels you can glimpse the inner powers of your own psyche and watch the interplay of beliefs and symbols as they are manifested before your eyes. Until you learn to do this, you will most certainly have difficulty, for you will not be able to tell the difference between your projections and what is happening in the inner environment. Any exploration of inner reality must necessarily involve a journey through the psyche, and these effects can be thought of as atmospheric conditions, natural at a certain stage, through which you pass as you continue. Period. Louder at 11:31. Now give us a moment. I'm in between, Jane said after a pause, and in her quote-unquote own voice, I don't know what's coming. I'm sort of half in trance and half out. End quote. She lit a cigarette. Do you want me to get you some more beer? I don't think it'll last that long, she said. Seth returned, and stayed longer, probably, than she had anticipated he would. His material was for Jane and grew out of the paper she wrote this afternoon on Eastern religious thought. See Appendix 15, which we read, by the way, and if you do not recall. The more personal parts of Seth's delivery aren't given here, yet enough remains to show Jane's main challenges some 11 years after she began speaking for him. The quotations also indicate how pervasive the regular Western view of quote-unquote reality is in our society, and what an undertaking it is to step outside of that framework or just to enlarge upon it. Jane is still in the process of that objective, intellectual, and yet very emotional movement of her psyche, as I am, but she's made considerable progress. In each of her books, she tries to more clearly communicate the details and developments of her journey. I note also that neither one of us is trying to get rid of our Western orientation or to desert it, but to understand it more fully. Now Seth said in part, beginning at 11:33, Rupert is working through the philosophical problems that were really only questions not completely asked. All of the writing he did today is important. He is preparing to go ahead in all directions. There are too many levels here to discuss all at once. One such level reinforces a trust in himself. The trust is accepted, however, because he is finally ready to work through the underlying issues as given at various times over the years, mostly in personal material. They involve cultural training and religious indoctrinations. Footnote. See the notes at 12:18 a.m., concluding the 708th session. End of footnote. He is challenging, finally, the old beliefs that say that the self-spontaneity is not to be trusted. He is challenging those ideas emotionally and philosophically, uniting physical action and inner mobility. In the past, he was still afraid to touch those beliefs with any but the slightest of hands. Give us a moment. What he wrote underlined is pertinent. Before he could go fully ahead, he had to accept the challenges of the past, and this meant he had to examine those old beliefs. He is only now really beginning to do so. They were not only his underlined private religious beliefs, but those of his contemporaries generally, and loudly underlined, "The foundations upon which your present civilization was made." He had to find the courage to encounter those old beliefs boldly, and he is finally doing so. I will have more to say to him in the dream state this evening, and I will shortly explain his experience with my voice. In a way, then, the session will continue at another level of communication. It will all be down in black and white for you before too long, however. My heartiest wishes to you both, and a fond good evening. Thank you, Seth, and the same to you. Good night. 11:46 p.m. All Jane could say the next morning was that she had no conscious memory of any contact Seth might have made with her in the dream state. Looking ahead a bit, in tomorrow night's session, though, Seth does explain her weekend sleep state encounter with his voice. All right, and that does indeed conclude session 710. Okay, so 51 minutes into this stream, plus like the almost half hour we did earlier. Let me just check a couple things here real quick, and then I think we can continue, hopefully. Let's see, give me a moment. As Seth would say, give us a moment. I have to make sure there's not a flea on me. I just thought I felt something just now. Okay, good. Also, I need to just get up and stretch my legs. One moment, please. Okay, I'm back. So, the Kindle app says that we have 44 minutes to read the next session. But you know what? I'm feeling pretty willing to really push the boundaries or push the limits of things tonight. Feeling rather hardworking tonight, so I think I want to do it. I'm feeling rather Mars in Capricorn tonight. I don't have Mars in Capricorn, but I'm feeling kind of like I do tonight. Mars is transiting my 10th house of career, and this is probably the closest thing that I have to a career, at least right now. So that makes sense. And actually, on that note, Mercury just perfectly aligned with Mars in my 10th house of career today, and Mercury is all about communication and talking and thoughts and ideas. So let us honor the stars by continuing with session 711, October 9th, 1974, 9:17 p.m. Wednesday. ESP class had really jumped last night. The 32 people crowded into our living room enjoyed rich, active, loud, and even profane exchanges among themselves, with Jane and with Seth. "Fuck you, Seth," one girl screamed, which daunted that worthy not at all. Class members hardly agree with Seth or anyone else all of the time. As usual, Jane found herself learning along with her students. She also took time to sing very delicately in Sumari, in contrast to Seth's powerful deliveries. All was recorded, of course. Class lasted from 7 p.m. until after midnight, and by the time it was over, everyone involved was, if not exhausted, certainly well exercised emotionally, were to get a transcript of the evening's Seth material at next week's class. Footnote. See Appendix 16. End of footnote. Wow. Sounds like that class session they had was full of Uranian moments. Speaking of planetary aspects and energy. Good evening, whispering. Good evening, Seth. Now, dictation, still whispering. Never as dramatic as our noisy class sessions. Your world, again, is the result of a certain focus of consciousness, without which that world cannot be perceived. Period. The range of consciousness involved is obviously physically oriented, yet within it there are great varieties of consciousness, each experiencing that seemingly objective world from a private perspective. The physical environment is real in different terms to an animal, a fish, a man, or a rock, for example, and different portions of that environment are correspondingly underlined unreal to each of those forms. This is highly important. If an inhabitant from another reality outside of your own physical system entirely were to visit it, and if quote-unquote his intelligence was roughly of the same degree as your own, he would still have to learn to focus his consciousness in the same way that you do, more or less, in order to perceive your world. He would have to alter his native focus and turn it in a direction that was foreign to him. In this way, he could, quote-unquote, pick up your station. Footnote. A note added later. Seth puts the, quote, home station of consciousness, end quote, analogy to good use in several more sessions for this volume. See the 716th session in section 5, for instance. End of footnote. There would be distortions, because even though he managed such manipulations, he might not have the same kind of native physical structure as your own, of course, through which to receive and interpret those data his altered consciousness perceived. Your visitor would then be forced to translate that information as best he could through his own native structure, if it were to make any sense to his consciousness in its usual orientation. All realities are the result of certain unique focuses taken by consciousness, therefore. In those terms, there underlined is no outside. The effects of objectivity are caused as the psyche projects its experience into inner dimensions that it has itself created. 935. Within, those frameworks are ever expanding, so that in your terms, at least, it seems that greater and greater distances are involved. Travel to any other land of physical reality must then involve alterations of consciousness. Footnote. In Note 4 for Session 702 in Volume 1, Seth briefly discussed space travel into another probability. End of footnote. New paragraph. While all of your own thoughts and feelings are quote-unquote somewhere materialized, only some of them become physical in your terms. They are then accepted as physical reality. They provide the basis for the physical events, objects, and phenomena upon which you all agree. Therefore, your world has a stability that you accept, a certain order and predictability that works well enough for daily concerns. Footnote. Refer to Seth's material on the basic unpredictability of consciousness and on probabilities in the 681st session in Volume 1 of Unknown Reality. End of footnote. At that point, you are tuned in precisely on your quote-unquote home station. You ignore the ghost symbols or voices, the probable actions that also occur, but that are muffled in the clear tones of your accepted reality. When you begin to travel away from that home station, you become more aware of the other frequencies that are buried within it. Footnote. In Volume 1, see Sessions 685 through 86 in Appendix 4. End of footnote. You move through other frequencies, but to do this, you must alter your own consciousness. Footnote. See Appendix 17. End of footnote. The probable realities connected with your own system are like the suburbs, say, surrounding a main city. If, for simplicity's sake, you think of other realities as different cities, then after you leave your own, you would pass through the suburbs, then into the country. then after a time into other suburbs until you reached another metropolis. Here, each metropolis would represent a conglomeration of consciousnesses operating within an overall general frequency of clearest focus, a high point of psychic communication and exquisite focus in the given kind of reality. Unless you are tuned into those particular frequencies, however, you could not pick up that reality. You might instead perceive the equivalent of jumbled sound or meaningless static, as Jane has done, or jigsaw images, as I have done. You might simply realize that some kind of activity was there, but without being able to pinpoint it. Wow. Sounds like sounds like in modern terminology, um, highly analogous to one particular type of computer program trying to interpret program language designed for a completely different kind of computer program. I don't know if any of you guys watching have ever tried that. If you try to open, a certain kind of file on your computer with a program that's not actually meant to read that file, especially various kinds of word processing programs, then you'll get a jumbled mix of letters and numbers and characters, basically, that make little to no sense. They usually make no sense whatsoever. You're lucky if they make any sense, if any kind of clarity breaks through. That would be analogous to what Seth is saying here about if we could somehow tune into other realities for which our consciousness is not tuned and sort of wired to perceive and interpret, stuff that our brain, even, you could look on that level, you could look at it on that level too, that our brain is not wired to decode, essentially. Now, all consciousness, including your own, is highly mobile. While you focus your attention primarily in your own world, certain portions of your consciousness are always straying. When you are sleeping, then, your consciousness often ventures into other realities, usually in a wandering fashion without tuning itself into any precise frequencies. Beneath many seemingly chaotic dreams, there are often valid experiences in which your consciousness, quote-unquote, lights in another reality, without being attuned to it with the necessary precision that would allow for clear perception. The information cannot be sifted or used effectively and is translated into dream images, underlined as your consciousness returns toward your own home station. Therefore, it has been difficult to achieve any kind of clear picture of such other realities. Pause at 9:59. Certain particular focuses then bring in different worlds, but unless your consciousness is tuned in with exquisite precision, you will not be able to perceive clearly. You will instead pick up at best the ghost images, probabilities, and private data that are not officially recognized as part of the main reality's official structure of events. New paragraph. Underlined, basically, however, consciousness is freewheeling. Such realities therefore always exist in your own psyche, outside of your quote-unquote home station, and some portion of your own consciousness is always involved in them, period. There are bleed-throughs, so to speak, in the form of unofficial perceptions that often occur, or quote-unquote impossible events that are seemingly beyond explanation. Pause. For now, think of your own psyche, which is a underlined consciousized identity, as a kind of quote-unquote supernatural radio. All of the stations exist at once within the psyche. These do not come through with sound alone, but with all of the living paraphernalia of the world. The quote-unquote you that you recognize is but one signal on one such station, tuned into a certain frequency, experiencing that station's overall reality from your own viewpoint, one that is unique and like no other, and yet contributing to the whole life of the station. Smile. The supernatural radio that is your entire psyche contains many such stations, however. These are all playing at the same time. It would be highly confusing in this analogy to experience or hear all of these at once, however, so different portions of the psyche tune in to different stations, concentrate upon them, and tune out the others for immediate, practical purposes. Because these stations all operate within the same psyche or supernatural radio, the overall quality of the programs will have much to do with the nature of the psyche itself. Radios are wired and contain transformers and transistors. The overall reception is dependent upon the wiring and the inner workings of the radio, and, intently, those workings exist apart from the stations they are meant to pick up. In the same way, the quote unquote supernatural psyche exists apart from the stations of consciousness that it contains. In this case, indeed, the psyche itself makes the radio, adding ever new connections and stations. 1018. New paragraph. Pretend that you have a radio with which you can clearly pick up 10 stations. First, imagine that during the daily programming there are 3 soap operas, 4 news programs, several excellent dramas, a few operas, some popular music, several religious sermons, and some sports programs. Each of these has its own commercials or messages, which may or may not have anything to do with the programs given. First of all, it would be nearly impossible for you to underline sample all of these programs with any effectiveness while going about your own affairs. To make matters more complicated, again, these programs do not involve only sound. Each one has its own dimensional realities. Beside that, there is a give and take between programs. For example, say that you have a certain Wilford Jones, who is a character in one of the soap operas. This Wilford, while carrying on within his own drama as, say, a sickly grocer in Iowa, with a mistress he cannot support, and a wife that he underlined must support with amusement. This poor besieged man on station KYU is also aware of all the other programs going on at the other stations. All of the other characters in all of the other plays are also aware of our grocer. There is a constant creative give and take between the day's various programs. Period. When our Wilford dramatically cries out to his mistress, "I am afraid my wife will learn of our affair," then the symphony playing on another station becomes melodramatic, and the sports program shows that a hero fumbles the football, yet each character has its own free will. The football player, unconsciously picking up the grocer's problem, for example, may use it as a challenge and say, "No, I will not fumble the ball." The crowds then cheer, and our grocer in his soap opera may smile and say, "But it will all work out after all." Are you guys hearing this? This is so fascinating to me. This is an incredible analogy describing the various unseen interweavings and interdimensional influences between different systems of reality that we are all, at least if we accept Seth's thesis here, constantly interacting with, you know. And, this reminds me also of how he said before, how there are no closed system, no system is closed. And again, it's like, can we really prove this information? I don't think that we can, at least not at this time. I don't know how we ever would prove such a thing, but just the idea of the possibility that maybe this is what is going on is incredible to consider. It's just absolutely incredible. In other words, there is in the psyche constant interaction between all the stations, and marvelous, literally unlimited creativity, in which, in your terms, all actions in one station affect all others in the other stations. Now take a break. 1034. Jane's trance had been excellent, her delivery steady and rather quiet for the most part. "I know what Seth was talking about," she said, "because I had the images to go along with what he was saying. Not that I could repeat him now, word for word." I reminded Jane that during Monday's session, the 710th, Seth had promised to, quote-unquote, shortly explain her hearing his booming voice in her sleep state last Saturday night. See Jane's description of the event preceding that session. Resume at 10:54. Now, dictation. Still using the same analogy. Wait, I did not inflect that correctly. Actually, give me a moment. I must satisfy my desire to check my phone. All right. The air conditioner dramatically clicks on. Now, dictation. Still using the same analogy. As he falls asleep some night, our grocer, Wilford, might suddenly hear the full strains of a symphony in his head, or instead catch a quick glimpse of a football player, or on the other hand, one of the musicians in the symphony orchestra may suddenly find himself thinking about how difficult it would be to have a mistress and a wife at the same time. That's fascinating. On the other hand, wait, Ferd might suddenly hear the full strains of a symphony in his head, or instead catch a quick glimpse of a football player. Or on the other hand, one of the musicians in the symphony orchestra may suddenly find himself thinking about how difficult it would be to have a mistress and a wife at the same time. These sorts of interplays between different realities. I love that. It's so fascinating. From the point of view of the perceiver, these would be unofficial events, and yet they can serve as important clues to the nature of reality. The separate programs existing at once each have their own schedules, and from underlined your reality, you could not play them all at once. It seems to you that you are outside of the psyche, so you think of someone as yourself operating this radio from that external position. From your point of view, you could not pick up the grocer's escapades and the symphony, for instance, if both came through at 8 o'clock in the evening, without switching from one to the other. You would have to choose which program you wanted. It is very easy, of course, to expand our analogy, changing the radio to a television set. In this case, the projections on the screen would be fully dimensional, aware of each viewer in each living room. Pause. Not only this, but the screen people would understand the relationship between you, the viewer, and, say, the other viewers in the same town. Behind the scenes, not only would the performers, as performers in all of the programs, all know each other, but the underlined characters portrayed by them would know each other and be aware of each other's roles in the programs, and even now and then stray into one another's dramas. Huh. It's like crossover madness here, right? At levels beyond the comprehension of the viewer, all of the dramas and programs would be related. Again, because of the specific poise of your consciousness, it seems to you that you are outside of all of these programs. You tune in to them, making choices, for example, if more than one favorite plays at the same hour. In greater terms, you are a part of the same quote-unquote set. And at another level, someone sees you as a character in a living room turning on a television set. Intrinsically, the psyche, the private psyche, contains all such programs and realities. The certain portions of it, however, choose to take different focuses in order to bring those aspects in more clearly. Reminds me of the architect in the Matrix movies, turning on the screens, as many screens, perceiving all the different aspects of any given reality, or at least any given Matrix reality within the context of those movies. Wonder if there's any chance that those movies drew inspiration from the Seth material. Pause at 11:13. Wait, let me make sure that's where we even were. Yeah, I'm pretty damn sure it was. To some extent, signals from all of the other stations are always in the background of any given program, and by momentarily altering the direction of your own attention, you can learn how to bring other stations into focus. Psychically and psychologically, those other stations upon which you do not concentrate form the structure of the psyche as you understand it, from which your earthly experience springs into focus. Studying yourself and the nature of your own consciousness, then, will automatically lead you to some extent to an understanding of the quote-unquote unknown reality. The unknown reality is composed of those blocked out portions of your own psyche and the corresponding frameworks of experience they form. Long pause, new paragraph. For the sake of imagery, you can imagine your normal consciousness as your connection with this home planet, the familiar station that you tune into every day. When you project your consciousness away from it, then you will encounter various kinds of atmospheric conditions. Once you understand what these are and what effects can be expected, such journeys can be undertaken consciously, with the conscious mind that you know acting as the astronaut, for example, and the rest of your consciousness acting as the vehicle. Such journeys lead to quite valid realities, but as an astronaut must know the best landing conditions, so you must learn how to quote unquote come in at the most auspicious time and under the best conditions. Such journeys take you through the nature of the psyche itself, as well as to those other realities that exist as the result of the psyche's concentration within particular frequencies. Projecting your consciousness out of your body, therefore, provides at the same time an inner probing of consciousness itself, as well as experience of its manifestations. There are then inner lands of the mind, and other worlds quite as legitimate as your own. They are intimately connected, however, with mental states which are then materialized, and so your own mental processes are highly involved. Take your break. 1128. He's really going, though, I'm telling you, Jane said, after remarking upon the shorter delivery. I'm hoping he says something about when I heard his voice in my sleep. Resume at a faster pace at 1140. Now, first of all, I have been speaking of the psyche as if it were a completed thing with definite boundaries. The private psyche is ever creative, actually, expansive and literally without beginning or end. Your experience of yourself marks the seeming boundaries of yourself. In a manner of speaking, I am one personality in one program or station. Rupert is another. We have learned to be aware of each other, to communicate between stations, to affect each other's programs, and to change each other's worlds. Footnote. See Appendix 18. End of footnote. I do not speak alone to Rupert and Joseph, for example, but my words go out to the world that you know. Still within your framework, Rupert tunes into another station, translates it, and broadcasts the information. To do this, however, he has to alter his own consciousness, withdraw momentarily from the official station to bring in this one. That means tuning into other portions of the psyche, as well as another kind of reality. The final translation of my material has to come through his organism, however, or it would be meaningless to you. Through him, I am aware of the nature and condition of your world, and offer from my viewpoint comments meant to help you. Through Rupert, then, I am permitted to view the earth, quote unquote, again in your terms. I exist apart from him, as he exists apart from me, yet we are together a part of the same entity, and that simply carries the idea of the psyche further. The other, Saturday, evening, while he was in bed, Rupert had a somewhat surprising experience. He was not dreaming. His body was asleep, but his consciousness was drifting. He clearly heard my voice. It seemed to come literally from out of the sky, down into another room outside of, next door to you actually, the one in which his body slept. For a moment the power frightened him, for it sounded like a radio turned up to an incredible degree, louder than thunder. At the time words were clearly distinguishable, though later he forgot what they said. For an instant he was tempted to interpret the power as anger, for in your world, when someone is underlined shouting, they are usually angry. He realized, however, that something else was involved. He did not sense my presence, but only heard the thunder of the voice. It shocked him because he is used to hearing my words from within his head. He had never before been aware of my voice as existing apart from him. In the dream state, he has heard me giving him information. In these instances, however, he was the channel through which my voice came. He has often wondered about the nature of my own independence and the kind of reality in which I exist. He was also aware at the time that while the voice literally boomed out, no one else would have heard it, yet the voice definitely came from outside of himself, and he certainly underlined seemed to hear it with his physical ears. Parentheses. Can you tell us what the voice said? whispering, "Let me continue." Rupert acts as a receiver when I speak, and so I must make certain adjustments so that my message can be channeled under conditions that involve, among other things, his nervous system and physical apparatus. That evening, through using what I call interior sound, I let Rupert become acquainted with the power at my disposal so that he could realize that it did, basically now, come from beyond his personality as he understands it. Footnote. See Note 4 for the 708th session. End of footnote. "1202. In regular sessions, as now, he and I again both make adjustments, and so in sessions I am what I call a bridge personality, composed of a composite self. Rupert and I meeting and merging to form a personality that is not truly underlined either of us, but a new one that exists between dimensions. Beyond that is my real identity." Rupert does extremely well with interior sound, and so I use that method rather than, say, an image to make my independent existence known. Now, Rupert called me originally, last Saturday night, at unconscious levels because he was upset with quote-unquote Earth programming. He thought that you needed some help from the outside, so to speak. That intent set up certain signals that reached into other realities or stations, and I answered. I was not speaking to Rupert personally when he heard me, but addressing myself to the world at large in a program that was indeed picked up by others. This program spread out and was translated by others in dream states. In physical terms, however, the message given that evening is still to be presented through these books. Give us a moment. End of dictation. 1209. And so in his own way, Seth answered my question of a few minutes ago. Now Jane paused, then came partially out of trance. I know he said that was the end of bookwork, she told me, but I think there's more on it. So if you'll get me a new pack of cigarettes, then... Continue dictation. Now, in your local programming, you have hosts of familiar characters, and at different times, in your terms, you have them play different roles. They underlined take different roles. These often represent strong idealizations alive in the private and mass psyche. Humorously, let me give you a brief example that will also show you how well I have learned your culture. Oh boy. Seth proceeded to name 3 currently famous television detectives. In their own ways, these are heroes representing the detective who is out to protect good against evil, to set things right. Now, these characters exist underlined more vividly in the minds of television viewers than the actors do who play those roles. The actors know themselves as apart from the roles. The viewers, however, identify with the characters. They may even dream about the characters. These have their own kind of super life because they so clearly represent certain living aspects within each psyche. I wonder if then, like, various YouTubers today, here in the modern era, could, like, take on symbolic roles of a certain level of the collective psyche. And maybe those YouTubers who become the most popular are those that simultaneously symbolize something the most, or like the most effectively perhaps, in the collective psyche. Which would then explain the lack of my YouTube popularity. I'm just kidding. I don't really care. Actually, I think, as I said before, I think the issue with that is I'm all about focusing on things that there's just not a wide audience for, or there might be a wide audience for it, or a somewhat wide audience for it, but it's not easy to sort of get out there with it because there's not as much interest in it to begin with. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. Where were we? The aspects are personified in the character. Through the centuries, in your terms, there have been different personalities, some physical and some not, with whom the species identified. Christ is one of these, in some respects the most ideal detective. In a different context, however, out to save the good and to protect the world from harm. In certain ways, man also projected outward the idea of a devil or devils, and for somewhat the same reasons, so that he could identify with what he thought of as the unsavory portions of the psyche as he understood them at any given time. In between, there are a multitude of such personalities, all vividly portraying parts of the psyche. Again, must try to get comfortable in the midst of this strange madness. The madness being, why the hell is it so hard to get comfortable tonight to begin with? 1221. These characters become portions of the underlined inner literature of the mind. Suppose an inhabitant from another reality saw one of those three programs and realized that people were watching it. Pretend he wanted to add more depth to the show. He might then come on himself in the guise of the hero detective, but enlarging upon the characterization, adding more dimension to the plot. So, often when some personality from another station wants to help change the programming, he comes on in the form of a personality already known in fact or fiction. However, you must realize that the personality is underlined larger than fact or fiction. Quote unquote, it is independent at its own level, yet it is also a part of the portion of the private and mass psyche that is so represented. I am Seth in those terms. There are many myths connected with my name. Footnote. About Seth's reference to the myths connected with his name, Set, or Seth, was an Egyptian god of evil with an animal's head, whose complicated origins could, it's thought, reach back in antiquity to at least 7500 BC. Hello there, Dead Draco. Welcome to the stream. In Judaism, of course, Seth was the third son of Adam and Eve, after Cain and Abel, Genesis 4 and 5. As one correspondent wrote us, quote, Seth is also a Hebrew name meaning appointed, i.e. the appointed one, end quote. However, some very early priestly genealogies omit Cain and Abel and consider Seth as the oldest son of Adam. In the 2nd century AD, for instance, the Sethites, who were members of a little-known Gnostic sect, thought of Seth, the son of Adam, as the Messiah. Seth also shows up in writings of the ancient occult religious philosophy, the Kabbalah, which was originated by certain Jewish rabbis who sought to interpret the scriptures through numerical values. The soul of Seth is seen as infusing Moses. He was to reappear as the Messiah. End of footnote. They all represent portions of the psyche as they were understood at various underlined times in man's history. Those portions were originally projected out of the psyche as it began to understand itself and personified its abilities and characteristics, forming superheroic characters of one kind or another, to which the psyche could then correspond and relate. End of dictation, 1229. Then, after producing a couple of paragraphs on another matter, end of session. Okay. And a fond good evening. I stopped to give you a rest. I'm all right. With much amusement. It shows you that I have concern. Yes. Well, thank you, Seth. Good night. End at 12:35 a.m. You know what's funny about that? I can remember in probably one of my earliest Seth streams, I think all the way back when we were analyzing Seth Speaks and I was still using my shitty webcam microphone, one of my viewers at the time actually asked if Seth, as in Seth channel by Jane Roberts, has anything to do with like the Egyptian god Seth. And I was like, at the time, I didn't know. I didn't think so. I certainly didn't think so, but I was like, I don't really know for sure. I don't think so. But now, finally, here in The Unknown Reality, Volume 2, Seth, at long last, addresses that very topic or issue or question. So there it is, the answer at last. Or I guess it's something of an answer. He could probably elaborate a lot more on that. Maybe he does at some point. Anyway, As we ate breakfast several hours later, Jane told me that during the night she'd kept waking up with ideas she thought were connected to unknown reality. When I asked her to write down what she could remember of them, she produced these items with whatever distortions they may contain. 1. Some of the hypnagogic images you see in your mind prior to sleeping and those at other times are alternates. That is, you could see those pictures physically if you opened your eyes, instead of the ordinary reality you quote unquote know is there. Inner vision evolves physical sight, lining up exterior data into the kinds of images that correlate. 2. Each reality is surrounded by its probabilities, but this is obviously relative. 3. Our experience of the present is enriched by our memory of past perceptions. In some systems, it works the other way. Inhabitants are aware of the future as we are of the past. On the other hand, their quote unquote memory of the past fades almost at once. 4. Again, I received information on Atlantis, only to forget it right away. I'd wanted to tell Rob about it this morning. End quote. Jane also came through with material about Atlantis right after the 708th session was held, less than 2 weeks ago. See Appendix 14. We described that episode briefly in ESP class the night before this 711th session was held, so had our doing so caused her second Atlantis pickup? But it's also quite interesting to note that on both occasions, Jane tuned into data on Atlantis within hours after Seth had discussed ideas involving alternate realities. And looks like that's not quite it for this session, because there appears to be an extension, another extension here of Note 6 that we were just reading regarding Seth's name and potential connections to Egyptian or other legends or entities or whatever. So let's see. It's weird how they won't always appear when we're in the midst of the session, when I bring them up, but then they appear at the end. So anyway, let's see where we left off with that. Okay, continuing with Note 6. Perhaps it's been remiss on our parts, but Jane and I haven't concerned ourselves with any connections her, Seth, may have with ancient Seths. We don't believe such relationships exist on any kind of personalized basis, although someday we'll ask Seth to comment here. We think the name of Jane's Seth came about through much more pragmatic needs. In Chapter 1 of the Seth material, Jane quoted Seth to be from the 4th session for December 8th, 1963, as that personality came through on the Ouija board, which we'd use to initiate these sessions. Quote, "You may call me whatever you choose. I call myself Seth. It fits the me of me." End quote. Reincarnation had been mentioned by the 2nd session, but since the concept meant little to us, we hardly considered the many names that would be involved. Once Seth gave us a name by which to call him, we simply began using it. I'm sure that at the time, Jane had no conscious knowledge about Egyptian, Hebrew, or even Christian origins or uses connected with the name Seth. Now, as I present Seth in part from the ESP class session for April 17th, 1973, as he answered students' questions. Quote, "So I ask you, what is your name, each of you?" Underlined, my name is nameless. I have no name. I give you the name of Seth because it is a name and you want names. You give yourselves names because you believe they are important. Your existence is nameless. It is not voiceless, but it is nameless. The names you take are structures upon which you hang your images. What you are cannot be uttered, and no letter or alphabet can contain it. Yet, now you need words and letters, and names and objects. You want magic that will tell you what you are. You believe that you cannot speak to me unless I have a name, so I am Seth. I told Rupert from our earliest sessions that he could call me Seth. I never said, my name underlined is Seth, but I underlined call myself Seth, my emphasis. And by it's saying my emphasis, I think that's Rob saying my emphasis when he put, but I call myself Seth. For I am nameless. I have had too many identities to cling to one name. Seth treats his own reincarnational background both generally and specifically, if rather briefly on both accounts, or on both counts, in chapter 22 of Seth Speaks. For the names of 3 of his past personalities as given in that chapter, see sessions 588 through 89. A 4th name, as well as names for Jane and me, can be found in the 595th session in the appendix of Seth Speaks. Which we did indeed go through here on this channel. You can look it up on my channel page. Just look for the stream about Seth Speaks. So, at long last, that is it for tonight. Next time, we'll continue with session 712 and hopefully, a couple or, 1 or 2, maybe 3 at the most, probably after that. So, give me just a moment. I can go over a brief description of what that will be about next week. Let's see here. Session 712. Your rockbed reality and its probable clusters, the solar system, space travel, neurological alterations, and intersections of consciousness. Then in session 713, your psyche compared to a multidimensional TV set, the use of the will in the formation of reality. So there you have it. Little preview of that, and indeed, as always, that will be coming on next Monday, as usual. Other than that, I'll be back, as I typically am, on Wednesday doing live tarot readings and most likely looking at the current astrology, live tarot readings and astrology readings. Then on Saturday, not quite sure what I will do a stream on that day, maybe something paranormal related or something else like spiritual related. I don't know yet. We'll have to see. And then, of course, back on Monday with more Seth material. So thanks everyone for being here. I did indeed catch the new Stranger Things season 3 and watched all of that. It's really, really good. I highly recommend it on Netflix if you haven't seen it. And as for now, geez, I don't know. I barely slept last night, so I'm probably just going to go have dinner before too long and go to bed. So thanks for being here, everyone. Hope you have a great night, and hope to see you next time. Bye for now.